I had a very strategic approach to doing ministry. Right. Like, I took the same approach that I used to build my business in financial services. I took that same approach to doing church. Today, the new due diligence is, do you exist online? Do you have social media handles? Do you have a following? Do you have engagement on your social media? If you don't have any of that, you don't exist.
You see so many of our churches that would never even understand what a budget is or how to budget.
Yeah.
You know, and the God will provide mentality is what's prevalent.
Yeah.
You know, so when I talk about that old guard, that's where I'm really coming from.
Yeah.
So I think that is really, really key. You know, this is God's business, and we need to set about doing God's business the way it needs to be done.
You know, on our journey, we meet a lot of ministers, and often you find that sort of big thinking, or that sort of, like I was saying earlier when we was talking, you know, sort of silos, people just staying in their own silos, not wanting to sort of merge and join. And I just think that there's so much more that could be accomplished by us coming together, sharing ideas. Welcome, Bishop Wayne Malcolm, to the Business of Church podcast. It's an honor to have you here. Really looking forward to getting into the nitty-gritties of what you're about and what life is like for you on your journey. So,
don't forget, formerly known as the Business Bishop.
Exactly.
Presently known as the Business Bishop.
Yeah. Presently known, currently known.
Exactly.
It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Thank you. Okay, so why don't we start where we like to start, really, which is your earliest memory of your journey that's led you to where you are today. What do you think is one of the key sort of moments where you can go back and say, this is where I began my journey?
Yeah, so I began my professional life in financial services as an independent financial consultant, which is a fancy way of saying that I sold financial products for a company. I was a salesman, really, but they taught us to understand the world of financial services and then spend a lot of time motivating us, because we were independent, meant we were self-employed. We worked with an agency, and so the manager of our agency made sure that we read motivational books, made sure that we attended motivational seminars. So as a teenager, I was exposed to the Zig Ziglars, the Jim Rohns, the Napoleon Hills, and then we got a lot of training around just leadership, management, sales, I guess just being a conversationalist and things of that nature. Well, as a teenager, and I was making, considerably more money than people twice my age because of the commission. You know, we were selling mortgages, we were selling pensions, we were selling life plans, and giving general financial advice. So at the ripe age of 21, because I got saved, I became a Christian at 15, and I knew that I would go into the ministry, right, at 15.
Is that because of the environment that you came from?
No, there was a sense of calling with me. I mean, the environment I came from was just called the world. Okay,
so your parents were Christians. They didn't attend church themselves.
Correct. So
that's at 15. That's quite quite a leap.
It was dramatic. To say the least, and it's kind of a long story, which I'm happy to tell maybe in a future podcast. So at the ripe age of 21, I kind of obeyed the call to go into ministry. So I left that particular opportunity, and started a church. I guess 21 years old, starting a church.
Let me just, there's a thing called imposter syndrome, and I'm thinking to myself, at 21, are big people going to be coming to my church and listening to me speak? Because you look young as it is right now, so I can only imagine what you looked like back then.
No, you got it right. You got it right. Yeah.
There some hair as we all had back then.
Yeah. Do you know, I think it was the years I spent in financial services that gave me a certain confidence, because we had to go out and cold canvas, and we had to start conversations with people who who we did with strangers, and then make an appointment, follow up, go to their home, make a financial presentation, sign on the dotted line. So because I was doing that since I was 18, I guess I had a certain confidence about talking to strangers, and I guess all the motivational material, as well as all the theological studies, because I was going to Bible school as well. I just knew that,
You're unstoppable.
yeah, that I could do this. I mean, it wasn't that I didn't have trepidations, right? Obviously, the butterflies were there and everything else, and all the usual doubts we contend with. But I knew that it was a calling on me to do that. So, started the church at 21. Now, that church grew very rapidly. So within about 10 years, it was like the largest church in our particular denomination. And partly why it grew, obviously, there was a lot of passion. There was a lot of energy. I was deeply convicted of the gospel and was very much a preacher of the gospel, right? And I said that to say this, that our membership wasn't people migrating from one church to another. These were people getting saved, like fresh out of prison, out of drugs, out of various things. They were getting saved. And but I do think that partly why we grew is that I had a very strategic approach to doing ministry. Right. Like I took the same approach that I used to build my business in financial services. I took that same approach to doing church. Like I had close ratios in my head. I developed a presentation. So I'd meet you, make an appointment with you to come and do a Bible study with you at your home. We do the Bible study, which was the presentation, and then I'd close you on give your life to Christ. Yeah. And I had these ratios that said, look, for every Bible study, I need to talk to, if I'm getting one Bible study out of 5 conversations, right? And if I'm getting one conversion out of 5 Bible studies, I had it all mapped out. Yeah. And so we were very strategic and intentional about winning souls. But I got a lot of that from my years in financial services.
Did you train a team, or was you doing most of it yourself?
Oh yeah, so the whole scalability thing was really important as well. So people that had joined us, I'd teach them how to do the presentations and how to set up presentations. So our members were just very busy making presentations, and then we employed the cell group model very early on as well. So we were having house meetings like all over the city, and so lots of newcomers would be coming to the Sunday service who had met us through one of the house meetings and things of that nature. So yeah, that very exciting years actually.
The cell model actually existed at this point.
It did. Well, I found out about it from a church in San Francisco. Actually, there was a church in San Francisco that had this model called prayer and share groups, and these were just little house groups where there was tea, coffee, little pastries, and a Bible discussion, and a bit of prayer, and a little bit of worship, and then a lot of fellowship afterwards. And I loved the model, so we brought that model in, and that was part of what helped us grow.
Okay. So when the other churches that are a part of the denomination saw what was happening, how did that go down?
Yeah, there were some issues, I guess. For the most part, people were quite inspired. By then I'd began hosting my own annual conference that was sort of a leadership development conference. So a lot of pastors were coming along to kind of explore innovative possibilities with their own ministry. It was quite difficult back then because the church, particularly the Afro-Caribbean church, was stooped into its tradition. There was, you could see who was in church, who wasn't. Back then, you could see who was saved and who was not, right? Because if you're a woman, then you wore the hat and you were totally covered, and you couldn't wear trousers. And if you're a man, it was a suit, it was a tie, it was all of that. So there were a lot of those things to overcome. And I guess as we became more pioneering and more innovative, and we pushed the envelope somewhat, I guess we lost a lot of friends, but at the same time, we made a lot of friends.
Well, I was going to say, because when you talk about having your own annual conference, that would have rubbed a few noses up the road.
Oh, it really did, yeah. It really did.
What made you think that you had to do your own one rather than to try and convince the church at large to move in the direction that you want?
Well, it's because I had been so impacted by conferences. So by that time, I was going annually to some amazing conferences in the States. And I made it part of my life's journey to attend preachers' conferences, pastors' conferences, pastor schools. So I was always going to conferences and thinking, oh, why don't we have something like that? You know, what if we could do this? And so I experimented with my own, and it just picked up. It gained momentum. I think the last one we did had like about 1,200 delegates in it, and then a lot changed.
just out of interest, right? So, because I'm used to the old school convention, district convention, national convention.
Yeah.
And eventually you go somewhere in the States and you have it a grand big. How was yours different to something like that? Say your the national conventions.
Yeah. So I think the national conventions usually were designed to, celebrate the big brand, you know, the denomination, right? And so there was a lot of business that was conducted at conventions around how the church as a denomination was doing. And it was more a matter of how we were contributing to the center. Right. But my conference was more about how we could help you build your ministry. So people tended to come not to give something, but to get something. And they wanted some new ideas. They wanted some motivation, some techniques, some tools. Yeah. So that was what made ours different. There was no denominational agenda. You could come from whatever denomination, and our roster of speakers were just people who had done well with church building, with church planting, with soul winning, and they were just going to share from their heart, from their stories. And so people went away fired up and felt like that they had been equipped.
Yeah.
That is good. That is good. It's because, you know, on our journey, we meet a lot of ministers, and often you find that sort of big thinking, or that sort of, like I was saying earlier when we was talking, you know, sort of silos, people just staying in their own silos, not wanting to sort of merge and join. And I just think that there's so much more that could be accomplished by us coming together, sharing ideas. And that's what I really like what you was doing there. And I could see the appeal, because even within your silo, if you've got people coming to your church, they need tools to survive in this world.
Really?
There are spiritual tools. That's fair enough, and I'm sure they get a lot of those. But the actual practical tools that they can use to just make their life better or to succeed, whether it be in their careers or whatever, I just think it's just a missed opportunity often enough if the leaders of the church don't broaden out the agenda slightly and to give people more.
Yeah, and I'm personally encouraged by the fact that a lot more ministries are thinking that way than were thinking that way back in the day. So back in the day, it was about, you know, get your ticket to heaven, live a holy life, and wait till the trumpet sounds. So it's almost like we were being prepared to die, but we weren't being equipped to live.
Yeah, exactly.
And there has been a shift, a noticeable shift and a sizable shift in the way that ministries think today. And they realize that, look, well, we actually don't know when Jesus is coming back, and we actually don't know when we're going to die. So we need to be equipped to live. And so churches have today, well, certainly the churches I work with, they have a much broader agenda, a more holistic agenda. And so it's no longer uncommon to see mental health seminars and workshops being done in churches, finance, personal finance, financial literacy classes being done in churches, health overall, focuses within churches. It's no longer uncommon. See marriage enrichment and relational counseling. So we kind of look at the whole spectrum of a person's experience and try to provide assistance, support, tools. And that's becoming more commonplace. Now, it's not ubiquitous, but it's becoming more commonplace.
You're probably finding that more so because there's a changing of the guard now.
For real. Yeah.
And certainly as part and parcel of that whole Caribbean sort of, and to some degree, sometimes ignorant mentality. I know I said it, not you.
Yeah, I didn't say that.
I said it. Well, no, it is.
Broad shoulders.
Yeah, broad shoulders. Right.
Okay.
But that I'm not going to take on anything new. Like you said, this is what we've done, this is what we've always done, and this is what we're always going to do.
Yeah.
And I think there has been a change of guard. We've come across now lots of younger ministers with they've had the sort of formal training, through university, they're a lot more educated.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks volumes in terms of the way in which you then impart what you've been educated with to a group of people that, to be fair, you are now responsible for.
Yeah.
Though they have to really have their own walk with Christ, but you often find there's still a lot of people that really look at you and see what you're doing, and so therefore there's a certain weight of responsibility that's on your own shoulders.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what I see now.
Yeah, it's one thing I wanted to ask, where this sort of, it's on our agenda to talk about, to be honest. You mentioned a lot of those services or a lot of those tools. How much formality and business structure do you think churches use or have used or should use to deliver those types of services? And do you think they should be charged for those services, or they should be charging?
Yeah, so I think part of the kind of evolution of the church's culture involves greater awareness of the business of doing church. It's almost something we didn't like to talk about. Definitely. Right? We didn't want to use the word business and church in the same sentence. All right. But we've become aware of the fact that everything costs money, right? And we've become aware of the fact that our buildings cost money, our equipment costs money, our staffing costs money, our events cost money, everything costs money.
Exactly. And God will provide,
and
doesn't necessarily pay every bill.
Well, yeah, it's at that place where I think we reached the crossroads several years ago and realized that we're going to have to become more strategic and more intentional about how we fund our operations. And it's gotten to the point where pastors that come to me, or young ministers that come to me and say, I want to start a church, what's your advice? Okay. I used to talk to them about prayer. I used to talk to them about scoping the city. I used to talk to them about soul winning. And now the first thing I say is, how much money do you have? All right. And they look at me like, what? I say, yeah, winning souls is free.
Yeah.
Building a church is going to cost.
Yeah.
And if you underestimate the costs involved, or you are naive when it comes to the business of church, you're not going to successfully build a church community, because there are costs. And you're going to have to kind of put on an entrepreneurial cap. And as much as it's not your business, you still have to think of it as God's business.
Yeah.
Right? You're stewards of God's business. Jesus said, I must be about my Father's business. And so you have to look at church planting and church growth as having a very real business component. And I think as part of the evolution of our culture, we are increasingly more aware of that.
Yeah. I think we should just take a moment to just pause and just consider that. It's the whole reason why we came up with this podcast, which is the business of church. For the simple fact that we see so many, and you mentioned it just a moment ago, we see so many of our churches that would never even understand what a budget is or how to budget.
Yeah.
And the God will provide mentality is what's prevalent.
Yeah.
So when I talk about that old guard, that's where I'm really coming from.
Yeah.
So I think that is really, really key. This is God's business, and we need to set about doing God's business the way it needs to be done.
Yeah.
If you had to, this is not an easy question to answer, but just pluck a figure. A young minister comes, because what I like to do is ask questions that I know people listening will probably be thinking. So, what's it going to take to start a church in London? What sort of money are we talking about? Double click. I like to double click on there.
So the answer to that is how long is a piece of string?
I knew.
Right? So it's almost like saying, what will it cost to start a business? Right? It depends on what kind of business you're in and at what level you want to come in. So the reality is that I would say to create some sort of cash flow forecast and literally do what Jesus said and count the cost. Right. So I guess the first cost is you're going to need a venue. Right. You're going to need a place to gather. All right. But then marketing and advertising and promoting your presence is going to cost. And then there are going to be some staff that you may need. Now, initially, you may rely on volunteers, but you may need some expertise because we actually live in an optical age. Right, we're in an optical age in which anyone that's not online doesn't exist. Right, so your online presence is the new due diligence. Yeah. Like, back in the day, if you need to look up a company, you'd have to write off the company's house and wait to get a report back. Yeah. Today, the new due diligence is: do you exist online? Yeah, exactly. Do you have social media handles? Do you have a following? Do you have engagement on your social media? If you don't have any of that, you don't exist. So your marketing and your promotions is gonna cost at a certain level. Now, again, depending on the size, the level you're coming in at, you may need to employ an administrator on a part-time basis. You may need to employ a musician on a pay-as-you-go basis. You may need to employ a camera person and all. So it's about figuring out what these things cost over any given month. All right. And then you can look at a year's projection. Yeah. And I say that, look, the same thing I will say to my business clients, because I'm not sure if I've said it already, but professionally, I'm a business development coach, and I give business advice to entrepreneurs in the private sector as a general rule. And what I would genuinely say to them is, look, if you need the money, right, to live on, your business is unlikely to succeed. What you're going to want is 6 months plus of the costs of running your business before you take anything out. And some people will go a year or 2 years before they take anything out. So what I say to a young pastor is, look, just begin to count the cost. And what you want to raise is enough to cover those costs for a significant period of time. And it would be great if you could start with that cash sum. Right? That's probably the best way to start, as most of the really progressive churches all start with a cash sum. They won't tell you that, but they started with a cash sum, right? But don't fall down the old trap of thinking we'll just raise it from week to week. We'll just pray and ask people to give and hope that we'll hit the target, because that's the recipe for church open, church closed.
Yeah. On that note, what additional advice do you give them in terms of not just relying on donations from members?
Yeah, and that's a really big deal, and I think that's where we are at the moment. Is that we and when I say at the moment, I mean several years back, that consciousness became very clear, right? And the pandemic made it super clear that you cannot fund a ministry on donations alone. Right? So this means that you're going to have some services that you can sell, right? So you're going to have to become somewhat entrepreneurial, have some services that you can sell. It means that you need to factor in a profit margin to any events and things that you're going to do, any tickets you're going to sell for a concert or whatever. This break-even mindset is not going to help, right? And then there are potential sponsorships. There are high net donors that can make a significant difference to your annual budget. All right, and so people have to think. I guess pastors now have to think beyond the weekly collection, and to become very entrepreneurial in the way at least strategic and intentional about how they fund their ministry. And yes, there are options, some of which I've listed.
Yeah, it's interesting. Your explanation to a a young minister really reminds me of when we started our business journey. So exactly, it's like I was on my way back from work, and I remember saying to myself, if you really believed in what we're doing, because we'd been running our business part-time, this is our first business, part-time for a number of years. I remember talking to myself saying, if I really believed in what I'm doing, I would leave my job and I'd do this full-time. And so I remember turning up, because Des was a contractor at BBC, and we used to have meetings there in some spare room and they allowed us to use. And, I remember saying to the guys, look, I'm prepared to leave my job if we all chip in certain amounts of that, I don't have to worry about income for the next 6 months. Then I'll be prepared to leave my job first, and then we can build things from there and so on. And, and we took that seed, even though we'd been running it part-time, but it never really done much. But we took that seed.
It's that belief.
Yeah, it's the belief. And, it made such a difference being your total focus. And, I always remember, when I told my mum what I was going to do, she was like, oh, God, people just try and fail. People try and fail. And Mum, so I didn't.
You got to forgive her.
I got to forgive her for that. But, I didn't tell her. She just saw me putting on a suit and leaving. She didn't know when I'd left, and so on. And we took that business from that seed, first year 100 and something, to its peak at 17.5 million. So
I would say, it's funny where most businesses really don't make any money for the first 2-3 years.
2-3 years.
In that time actually fail.
Yeah.
We was always in profit.
Yeah, we was. But one of the good things that we had is, Des would be supporting, Lloyd would be supporting the business, but they weren't drawing a salary from it.
Right.
So it still feeds into everything that you're doing.
Yeah.
So and this is the thing that we want people to understand, is that let me just make this one point, is that as a church founder, you're already an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
You already are, an entrepreneur, and that you need to embrace that. Don't pigeonhole it and just apply it to just, the doctrine and what you're trying to achieve spiritually, because that same spirit that you have that made you go and do that can help the church grow in so many other ways.
Yeah. No, I was just really going to touch on the fact that even though you referred to the time where myself and Lloyd, our other business partner at the time, didn't take from, it was all part of a cash flow.
Yeah.
So we already knew when we were going to be coming onto the business.
Exactly.
At the point where me coming onto the business didn't make sense at that point. So it was deemed, look, don't leave your job just now. Keep working nights.
Yeah.
Or during the day.
Yeah.
But then you'll come on at this point.
Yeah.
So it was all part of a cash flow. And it's really what you're talking about. If you plan it out, you actually get to see what's going to happen.
Exactly.
Where. So,
or if you don't plan to
succeed,
you plan to fail.
Yeah.
So can I talk to you about a slightly off-topic situation, but still to do with business and potentially could help? AI in church, because there are a number of things that I'm a technologist. I've always been, from primary school building robots through to what I do now. And I see opportunities for AI in church, whether it be ministers using ChatGPT to prepare sermons and things like that, or to research theological subjects and so on. So, what's your thoughts on AI right now? Its threat to society.
Well, apparently they say it's a threat to the very existence of humanity, right? But then they've said a lot of things about any new disruptive technology over the years, right? So my position is I'm a big fan of AI. All right. So obviously within my coaching practice, not only do we use some AI, but I actually encourage our clients to use the AI that works for them. So rather than seeing the innovation as a threat, I think it's important to realize that there's an opportunity in there, right? Because if it does anything, it saves you a lot of time, and it's an additional mind. It can help you to rethink things through and to reword some things, right? So I think that there's a couple of ways that churches can use AI if there's a tech savvy person. Now, the most important thing to for me to say, first of all, is that I'm not suggesting that the pastor of the church become a tech-savvy person and start trying to experiment with AI. I am suggesting that right now in the modern world, on your team, there need to be a tech-savvy person who is not afraid of the world of AI, okay? And then you can pilot certain projects, and once you're happy with the results you're getting, then you can really integrate the technology into your operation.
Sorry, one second. Do you think that there would be objection if the congregation knew that the pastor was researching some of the sermons he's holding and some of the subjects he's talking about, that he'd used an AI to do the research?
Yeah, no more objection than the people who object to him using Google to find. I mean, you see, there are people who are just not progressive, right? There are people for whom a calculator is a tragedy because it took away the times tables, right? And it stopped us thinking. There are people for whom a mobile phone is a tragedy because we don't have to remember anyone's phone number anymore because it's all stored, right? And so there is a generational, I guess there is a bit of a culture war between the generations, but I think people who are growing up in the modern world, people who have been exposed to the internet as a way of life, are not as nervous about that. Now, one of the things I think is important for the pastor to know is that even I'd have a problem with you just saying to ChatGPT, give me a sermon for Easter, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then to get up and kind of work with that. I still believe you're supposed to pray. I still believe you're supposed to study the Bible. I still believe you're supposed to ask questions of God, of yourself, and of your congregation to kind of know where you want to go. But once you know where you want to go, of course, ChatGPT can help you outline that, can help you think that through.
Yeah.
And the technology behind ChatGPT is also available, I guess, in other sorts of softwares, and I think it's a matter of time before it's fully introduced into Bible study software, right? And once it's in there, you'll probably get more out of that Bible study than you would, So
the way I look at it, it's a tool, and just like the Bible is a tool.
Yeah.
You have various tools to help you accomplish things. I don't see a problem with AI at all.
I think for me, I always look at it like, look, the idea should come from you,
Right.
And the tool is there to research your idea.
Yeah.
And so therefore, if you're getting that information back, you're still going to, if you're sitting there just reading what's coming up on the screen, then you've got a problem.
Yeah.
Right. But if
That's a problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at it and you read through it and you think, and then it inspires you, gives you new ideas and so on and so forth. That is what I feel, is the next level. And I think those who are doing it, they're not going to evangelize about it. They're not going to tell people about it. But I think they're, it's going to go to another level.
To be honest with you, you put something into Chat GPT and you just read it verbatim. You better have done your research, just for the simple fact.
It could be wrong.
It could be wrong. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, we're going to have to take this to a part 2 of this podcast. The last question: what advice would you give to pastors? Initial bit of advice, and I know you spoke about, well, hey, if you're starting your church, this is what you would typically do. But what would be your overarching advice to them?
Yeah, so within the context of this podcast, my overarching advice would be to say that the business of your ministry is a critical component, a critical success factor, that it's not carnal to make it a priority. It's not unspiritual to make it a priority. It's important that you are prayerful and that you're obedient to your calling, but understand that there's an engine in your calling, and that's going to be the business of the ministry, how it's managed, administrated, and how it's financed and funded. And that thinking about that and and learning about that so that you can be more strategic and intentional about it, unashamed of it, just to totally get the shame out of that game and know that nothing is going to work for you without the correct funding. And even if you get a lot of funding and you don't have a strategy and you don't have some financial controls and a budget to work with, then the funding can just disappear and you don't even know where it's gone. So become intentional and strategic about the business of your ministry and utilize some of the services that are available today. I mean, I was looking at what you guys do online, and I'm thinking, yeah, I mean, we need help. There's a lot of ministries that need help. They need people to help them understand the business of the ministry and make sure that those ministries remain liquid for the foreseeable future, and that they maximize on the opportunities to multiply their income. There are lots of opportunities, including gift aid and everything else, and some ministries not even taking advantage of. So that would be my overarching advice.
Okay,
Splendid.
wonderful.
A great conclusion to our podcast. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to come down and fellowship with us.
My pleasure.
We look forward to perhaps a part 2 later on.
Definitely.
I'm up for it. I like you guys.
Well, that's a start. People do business with who they like.
Good.
Yeah, don't forget to follow us, like us, and make sure you share. And we'll see you on the next podcast, The Business of Church. God bless.